This is Declarations.
Every day you go to bed trying to think about what you accomplished that day and what you might accomplish the next day.
Hi, this is Todd Rich, and welcome to the Declarations Podcast. The purpose of the Declarations Podcast is to engage in deep conversations with thought leaders in investing and investments, especially with those who provide an independent perspective. Our goal is to explore the foundation behind the success of some of the world's best investors and to understand the source of their inspiration. Hopefully, by hearing their stories, we can all become better investors. We're excited to welcome today Jon Q Petersen to this podcast. Jon hails from Shreveport, Louisiana, where he is the president of Marlin Exploration, an independent oil and gas exploration company, as well as Peterson Private Equity, a family investment firm. Stemming from Jon's lifelong love of race cars, Jon's family is involved in multiple auto dealerships, including Team Honda, the largest retail dealership of any brand in the state of Louisiana. Well regarded for his leadership in both exploration and cars, Jon sits on the board of Maven Royalty Partners, a mineral rights startup, as well as the Louisiana Dealer Services. Jon and his family are well known in Louisiana for their philanthropic involvement. Among their many projects, the Q Petersens have helped to establish a clinic at the LSU Health Shreveport Children's Center to assist children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He also served as fundraising chair for Louisiana's first hospice facility and Sutton Children's Hospital. Jon truly lives his own philosophy. You must participate in life. Jon's a true gentleman, and I'm proud to disclose that Jon and his family are investors with us here at Declaration. I am honored that he agreed to join the podcast today. Jon, welcome to the Declarations Podcast.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, Jon, as you know, I like to start all of my conversations in the same way, by asking about a declaration. And I really think of a declaration as a mission statement with an aspirational nature, maybe guiding principles similar to those laid out in our own U.S. Declaration of Independence. So, Jon, here it goes. What is your declaration?
Well, Todd, I think the Declaration of Independence got an awful lot of things right. I think we're blessed to live in the greatest country with freedom and opportunity. I think our founding fathers' principles that were also captured in the Judeo-Christian ethic, I think they all are guiding principles that would get us to a higher place in life. And I think every day you should go to bed trying to think about what you accomplished that day and what you might accomplish the next day. That doesn't necessarily have to be work or philanthropy, but maybe it's clean out the garage, but every day have a purpose.
Every day have a purpose. I like that. Well, Jon, we're going to get over time to your own childhood and your business and philanthropic experiences. But before we get there, let's talk about your name. Q Petersen isn't very common. So can you please give us some of that history?
My forefathers were Danish, and the actual legal name my legal last name is Qvistgaard-Peterson. And back in Denmark, the Qvistgaards and the Petersens were like the Tennessee version of the Hatfields and the McCoys. They were warring factions, and they got together and healed it all with a marriage, and marriage also involved the combining of the names. So my children's name, my wife's name, my father's name was all Qvistgaard Peterson. For simplicity, we go by Peterson. The signature purpose is Q Petersen, but it confuses a lot of computers and TSA people and things like that.
But I actually didn't know that. So it may sound like a difficult name for, I guess, computers, but it's really about the melding of two families that were historically feuding. That's a fantastic story.
Correct.
And true to your Danish roots, I guess your grandfather emigrated from Denmark and founded a company called Blue Plate Foods in New Orleans, which I think had the original patents on Wesson oil. So, you've mentioned that you believe your grandfather was one of your mentors. Maybe what did you learn from him? Tell us a story that,
He was very much European. He was very, not strict, but he had manners, and he taught us manners and respect for others, regardless of their station in life. he loved to work. He had no hobbies other than work. I do remember a time we were fishing and he was reading the Wall Street Journal in one hand, holding the rod in the other, and he got a big fish on, and he started yelling, "Come take this, come take this." And I went to take the Wall Street Journal, and he said, "No, take the rod." I'm different than him. I certainly like to work hard, but I like to play hard too. Got a lot of interest, not interesting, but just hobbies, things I like to do.
Sorry, John, just before you do that, that reminds me of a story. I can't help shaking it. When my dad took me, I must have been 8 years old. I'm from New Jersey. So my first concert was John Bon Jovi, right? As a true to New Jersey roots. And when my dad took me to the concert, he brought a Wall Street Journal and was sitting there in the upper row where I was, an 8-year-old holding a lighter back in the days when you used to do that at concerts. And my dad was reading the Wall Street Journal. So I relate to that story.
Your dad, my granddad would have gotten along.
Sorry, you were going to say what was some of the things that you learned from your
He
grandfather?
encouraged you to be curious. I was always a little whippersnapper kid. I was always asking him questions, and my father, don't bother him, don't bother him. My grandfather would say, "Oh, no, 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 questions are good." He never discouraged us from asking, and maybe that was the start of the learning process.
It's great. And so, you grew up in Shreveport. And how would you describe Shreveport to people who maybe aren't that familiar with that part of Louisiana, that part of America?
Shreveport is small town USA. When I grew up here, and still to this day, we have a lot of really great people. Our issues have been historically that we were a regional oil and gas exploration center. And through the years, most of those companies, the larger ones for sure, have consolidated back into Houston and kind of left us behind. Historically, we've had some interesting characters as governors, and a lot of those governors were blessed to have unfettered income through the oil and gas revenue. And they, to some degree, turned it into a populist type state where the state provided many things that most states do not, healthcare, et cetera. As the money has run out, the quality of those services have run out, as oil and gas is a depleting asset. And we have the unenviable geography being sitting right next to Texas. So we're not a real high performing state, and we're right next to Texas, which is knocking them dead right now. So we've had our tough times here, but it's home. I'm too old to leave. My friends are here. My life is here.
Yeah, well, let's hear about your life. It sounds like you were born there, your friends are there, and your father, you talked about your grandfather, but your father, really playing off your grandfather's influence, was also curious. Sounds like he was an academic in addition to being a business person, and was especially curious in science and nature, right? So was it the science that led you into oil and gas, or was it just a product of being in Shreveport?
Probably a little bit of both. I clearly, when I first got involved in the oil and gas aspect of it, I didn't understand the complexity and the challenges and the difficulties, but it seemed a logical thing to do. Here in Shreveport, if you had the resources to fall back on a family business or other family assets, farming, timber, whatever, people tended to stay because it's a nice place to live. The pace of play here is pretty gentle. The cost of living here is very low. And those of us who did not have those anchors to hold us here, a lot of people had to leave just to find opportunities in life. And it's been a shame to see them leave, but it's been interesting to see that most of my friends that did leave have found real success in other venues in other cities and have, life goes on and that they've done well.
Got it. But you stayed, and it wasn't just the family history that kept you there. And it's funny you mentioned, I guess, about oil and gas was a little bit because you had the luxury of working in a family business, but you didn't recognize the risks. And yet, I don't see you as terribly risk averse, or at least to me, as someone who is risk averse, I wouldn't think of race car driving as something to do as a pastime. But yet, you love that. How'd you get into that?
In the racing or oil and gas?
Well, I guess into both, but let's, oil and gas, I assume was just a family business, right?
Family business. I was trying to chase racing and it, gave me some identity here. I was certainly not your top notch employee because I was always up towing a race car down the road somewhere. But the racing was just something that I'd always wanted to do as a kid, underestimated the amount of commitment that it took. Where I'm looking back on it now, racing back then had a certain level of risk that's has been eliminated a lot today. I'd have to declare myself irresponsible to be doing that with 3 children. But, you're in your 20s, you're bulletproof, you're going to the top, all your dreams are still intact. And so I did it for 12 years, and
How did your family, you mentioned your kids, you stopped when you had kids, but you had parents. How did they feel about your race car driving at that age?
they didn't go. Nobody encouraged me. I'll say that. I had to do it all myself. And that's the way it should be done. If you take on something like that, you need to shoulder all the responsibilities. My parents were not wild about it. They did not pound the table and say, quit, or, we're firing you or something like that. But they certainly didn't endorse it or encourage it. I did have children while I was doing it, and I look back on now and think about what could have been a possible another outcome, and that would have been terribly unfair. And, it does happen. People do get hurt, but today in environment, the technology has made it a lot more safer environment than it was when I was doing it.
Well, we're glad, obviously, that none of those bad outcomes happened to you. So, while you were doing that, you mentioned you might not have been the best employee, but you were, in fact, building Marlin Exploration while also racing. How did you manage to do both of those things?
Just, crammed a lot of time into a small space. Unfortunately, my family, I wasn't there as much as I should have been. I see my children now being different kinds of parents than I were, and that they're very involved and I was involved. I'm not saying I neglected my kids, but I couldn't make every soccer game and I couldn't make every basketball game because I was out jousting with my own set of windmills. In the end, it all worked out. You mentioned oil and gas is just fascinating. It's maybe the most fascinating game I've ever been involved in, but I'm not sure it's a very good business. It is so piled on with every form of risk you can think of, but it is doable. It can be done. I've always liked the scientific side of it. National Geographic was my first magazine.
You said it might not be the best business, but it's a fascinating game. What do you mean by that?
The puzzle, unraveling the puzzle of where did God hide the oil is quite an intriguing puzzle. And then when you think you have an idea where God hid some of the oil, then you have to go through the minutia of acquiring the mineral rights over that area, which is complex and more multifaceted and getting more fractured every day. Then you have to deal with securing the capital, and then you have to deal with the actual execution of getting a well drilled. When we drill a well, it might take a month to get the well drilled, but we may have worked for 3 or 4 years to get to that point. So we always have several different projects in the queue that we're trying to move to a drilling status.
And obviously, the pace of technological change has been enormous, both in terms of the geology and the science behind that, and then the drilling technology. I mean, is it an easier game than it was before, or is it harder?
I guess it depends on how you're pursuing it. We still pursue it primarily in a conventional manner where we drill vertical wells looking for porous and permeable reservoirs that are full of oil or gas. Today, the world has got new technology thanks to George Mitchell of Mitchell Energy of horizontal drilling and fracking, and they're able to recover oil now out of shales, which are porous, but they're not permeable. And that is more of a manufacturing and a mining process. It absolutely works. It's very predictable. It takes tremendous amounts of capital. Here in our backyard, there's the Haynesville gas play. These wells cost $10–12 million per well, and there have been thousands of them drilled. In West Texas, wells out there cost $6–12 million, depending on depth and complexity, and there have been tens of thousands of them drilled. They work. They're predictable. In order to do that, it would require massive amounts of capital that we don't have ourselves, so we would have to go to Wall Street or other sources. I'm too old to do that.
Has that changed the game? Was this business more of a family business in the past, and now it is becoming more institutional, or it's just the majors? Is that what's happened?
Well, yeah, but it seems that the smaller companies will snap up the pieces of these new plays like West Texas and even here, and they'll jump in there quickly because our speed and our mobility gives us a little advantage. And then the major companies will come along and start buying up those smaller people's assets, buying up their companies, and that's what's happened in West Texas in particular. It used to be a lot of smaller operations out there, and now the majors have come in there, Exxon, Chevron, people accidentally have come in there and consolidated a lot.
One of the things that was on the oil side. The other side of your business has been in cars. And so, I mentioned that you have a history as a race car driver. Sounds like that's now too risky for you. But you built a business in auto dealerships, Team Honda, Team Toyota. Is that ultimately related to your love of race car driving?
No, no. My father had a little exposure to automotive retail through loaning money to some friends that got some dealerships started. What I've noticed about contrasting oil and gas and automotive is like what I was going to say about real estate and oil and gas. When you find an oil reservoir, it's a depleting asset. When you acquire a nice real estate asset, it should be an appreciating asset. So those differences are stark to me. And I've known a lot of really bright people in the oil and gas industry that have gone broke for one reason or another. And I know a lot of really nice people that have survived for generations and generations on the automotive business. It is a somewhat doable. I'm not saying that it's easy by any means. It's very much a people business. It's very much an activity-driven business. I'm saying it takes us years to get a prospect to a drilling status, and every day in the car business, you got to go in there and you can't accomplish something. You have to accomplish a lot every day, meeting customers, taking care of customers, fixing cars, doing finance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a good diversity away from the unending risk of oil and gas.
In some ways, though, they're two different spectrums, right? And maybe I'm taking the analogy too far, but the type of oil and gas business that you mentioned is really the upstream portion. Whereas in the car side, you're not really in the upstream portion. You're in the downstream portion. You're in the retail, distribution, and sales business. And so it's interesting. I guess in some ways you're truly vertically integrated, just in different
Cradle to
businesses.
grave.
Right.
But the one other thing about the oil business, it's a small community. We all know each other. We always say we're not in the loop, and then we got in the loop and we realized the loop's not very big. But it's enabled us to be introduced to other opportunities that are just not drilling. We stood up a frac sand company a number of years ago that turned out to be a real big success. So we stood up a mineral fund a number of years ago that has been a very good performer and done very well for us. So I don't know if I look upon exploration as a loss leader or what, but with all that, if I put oil and gas into one bucket, including the minerals and the sand mining, we've done great.
Hi, this is Todd Rich. Thank you for listening to the Declarations Podcast, where top investors and business leaders share their insights and provide an independent perspective. We hope you're enjoying this episode. If you'd like to learn more about Declaration Partners or listen to more episodes of the Declarations Podcast, please visit our website at www.declarationpartners.com. And now back to the episode. Well, I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about your own family's background and yours personally is a willingness to look beyond the confines of whatever one particular business you happen to be in, and then to see around the corners. And you just mentioned several of them, right? Whether it's the auto dealerships, the frac sand, some of the mineral rights. I think that's, to me, that flexibility, it embodies the entrepreneurial spirit. So kudos for that.
Thank you.
One of the things that you've always said also, and maybe, has something to do with the nature of the businesses you've been in, is you always talked about teamwork. This isn't just an individual game. And I know you've named your auto dealerships Team Honda, Team Toyota. When you were a race car driver, you were part of a team. Let's maybe take it more broad than just business if you're willing to go there. You said you think everyone in America needs to participate in the economic system, or the system itself will fail. Is that really just teamwork in a broader sense? Is that really what you're saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. We're all pulling on the same end of the wagon. Yeah, yeah.
So what is your advice then to, let's say, a budding capitalist who wants to be part of this great American economic system? What should one do to pull his or her weight?
First things, participate on some level. If you're Bill Clinton had an idea that I thought was a great one about a national job corps where people between high school and college could give 2 years of their life to serving something bigger than themselves. And
The AmeriCorps program.
yes, yes. And I strongly endorse that. And I think as an adult, we need to take that same attitude into everyday life. And it just makes you feel better about yourself that you have contributed on some level. And our business aspect of that here in oil, we deal with, geology, geophysics, land and legal, production engineering, drilling engineering, reservoir engineering. And I try and make sure that we all come together as a team to attack our opportunities or evaluate our opportunities in a multidisciplinary approach. The car business, the same thing. Your if new car department, your used car department, your parts department, all have to work together. If allowed, they can become separate silos, but it's in their best interest and everybody's best interest, including the customer, that we all work as a team. And the same thing about just participating in life. We did a family meeting a number of years ago, and we had a consultant in there, and he gave us all a test. We all took it individually, and it was a silly test about you're on the moon and you have these 10 items, and what's the most important items? And so we graded our papers. Nobody did very well, and then we did the test again, but this time we talked about it. And when we graded our paper the next time, we did much, much, much better because we had pursued things as a team. And I absolutely believe that is the right
What are some of those 10 items that you decided to bring with you on the moon in this theoretical exercise?
Well, it was they were already listed, and you had to determine which ones were important to your survival.
Got it. And it worked out better as a team. Well, you just mentioned something that I've heard you say frequently, to participate in life. What does that mean to you when you say that?
Go forward. I mean, I don't care if you go to the library and read a book, or if you go down and hit a tennis ball against the wall, or go to the bank and help people make good loans, or come up here and help to try and drill a well. But inject energy into your life. It's going to be over before you know it, and participate. You'll be much happier. The world will be better off. You'll have a sense of accomplishment, even if you've just been hitting a tennis ball up against the wall or hitting golf balls down a golf range. Some level of
Something active is what I'm hearing. It's don't take life passively. Actually do something is what I'm hearing.
But you can go to the library and read books and be smart, and you share your knowledge with others. I mean, you don't have to be, running marathons necessarily, but you have to be involved.
I think that's great life advice. Try and teach that to my kids, obviously, as well. And fortunately, they still know what books are. That's good. Now, it seems like your family has really been participating in life, I guess, since here in America, since the late 1800s, and you continue to do so. So what are some of the ways that you're participating, whether it's business and hard work, or it's your family, philanthropy? What are some of the things that you are doing to participate fully?
Well, I mean, I still come to the office. I'll be 75 this week, and I still come to the office because I enjoy it. And if I do sit home for a day, I get bored and restless very quickly. So I come to work. We have a family foundation, and my daughter helps with us with making those decisions and vetting opportunities there. My two sons, I have one son works here with us in the oil company. My other son runs the dealerships now. I'd hire them if their name was, Wilson. I mean, they're good people. They embrace life. They're very engaged. With 10 grandchildren, I've always got a soccer game or a cheerleading or a dance recital or something to go to. And
And a pipeline of future employees, it sounds like.
well, that's going to be somebody else's problem. Got a lot of people eating at the trough. But we stay busy. I like to hunt. I like to fish. I like to play golf. I used to ski a lot till I had a injury that stopped all that. But anyway, just keep moving forward.
Now, at one point when we were talking about doing this podcast, you pointed out that some of the other people that I interviewed had been more Wall Street types, smart folks, but they had generally built their careers and their wealth in the world of investing. And I see you in contrast as a real operator, someone who has actually grown real businesses working from the ground up, so to speak. I guess maybe in the oil business, even underground. What do you think are the differences between an investor and a business builder, a real operator?
Well, I would say that, you and David and Bennett Goodman and all the other folks that you've interviewed, they're operators. They operate their companies. They have daily challenges and opportunities that they have to deal with. As a private investor, I have a neighbor at a home I have in Wyoming, and they sold out a couple of years ago for a whole lot of money. They were in the private equity business, secondary business. And he told me, he says, investing your own money is a lot different than investing in the company, buddy.
Don't we know it? Hopefully it makes us better.
Yeah. Well, we try and be patient. We're not afraid to miss a deal. I say we're a long-term investor, but we don't have an institutional calendar, but we do have patience to work with opportunities until they come to fruition. But I think, people in institutional investors, they maybe having never done it, I'm really not qualified to say, but I think they may be under more pressure than we are. We kind of let the river flow, and we have a good network of friends that bring us deals, and so we have a lot of opportunity to look. And like I said, we're not afraid to miss one. And they're like trains. There'll be others.
Patient to deploy and patient to sell is what I'm hearing.
Correct. Correct. And willingness to sell. I know when we went to sell our frac sand company, I was the only director that questioned it whether we should or should not. And looking back on it now, we should have, because the thing's only as high as value one time.
Right. Should have and did, it
And
sounds
did,
like. So
and
you had the discipline to both get in and get out. Yeah. Kudos. Good for you. Well, as you know, we're, at Declaration, we are fortunate to count you as investors. I believe that it's because of a shared sense of values and commonality. But you said it, you described it better than I ever could. So thank you for that. You are the third generation steward of a family business. You just mentioned you have two adult children in the business. So how do you think about operating the business in that manner as a family steward? Is that any different than you think if you had, I don't know, private equity owners or some other type of corporate structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we had private equity owners, especially in the oil and gas side of things, I mean, our pace of play is not real fast here. We don't go breathlessly running up and down the street looking for places to drill. We nurture them over a long term. The car business is intense. I mean, in that every day you get up and go to work. One thing I failed to say earlier,
But it feels intense when I go and buy a car too. I don't know if that's the intent.
you got to keep the customer satisfied. I've learned in the automotive experience, we have a lot of wonderful people that work in car dealerships all over the country. I mean, there are a lot of, if given the right opportunities, given the right educational opportunities, these people could have been. And the same thing I say about my friends in racing. A lot of really smart, hardworking, caring people that, giving a little different circumstance of life, it could have been a wolf on Wall Street. And I try to remember that I'm no better than they any day.
Well, and yet you've given them opportunities, which is a wonderful thing, right? To become their best self, to participate in life, if I'm going to borrow a phrase.
Well, one thing I've noticed, Todd, through the years, we have an annual Christmas party with all our managers at the dealerships, and now we've got 60 managers. And I'm always impressed that, none of them come up and say, thanks for the Christmas bonus, but they do come up and say, thanks for the opportunity. And that to me is much more fulfilling to me and hopefully to them than the Christmas bonus we may give.
That's fantastic. It's teaching a man to fish.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Let's shift for a second to life outside of business. And this is a little raw perhaps. I know you sadly lost a granddaughter to a very rare genetic disease. And from that tragedy, you decided to change your life in some ways and to give back meaningfully, specifically to children or to families of children who don't have the same resources that you and your family are fortunate to have. Can I ask you to just share, some of your feelings, what you were feeling at that moment and what inspired you to give back in the way you have?
Well, one thing that was, I guess, two big lessons. One is that when birth occurs, it is unimpeded. It is a miracle that we take for granted. And, when you think of the whole process, it's pretty incredible. I was very impressed by my own family, how my children and my wife and, all of our siblings, everybody came together to support my daughter during that tough period. And you realize there's a lot of people out there that go through these tragedies on a somewhat regular basis without any support. I found then that the amount of children's services here in Shreveport was very lacking. And so we set out to actually, as a catalyst, was the golfer Al Sutton, who his business manager lost a child suddenly about the same time. And everybody kind of came together at the same time and place to help build what we called Sutton's Children's Hospital. And we built a children's much more full line of children's services here than there was before that. And so there was some good that came out of it. There was some real horror that came out of it also. And now you look around the world at all the horror we see, name any war you want to talk about. Those people love their children and suffer just like we did during that period. And it just seems, you just wish you could eliminate all that pain in the world, but it seems to be part of the process now.
Kudos for giving back in the way that you do. Every time I go to Shreveport, I'm told of stories of your family's generosity, whether it's the YMCA, Junior Achievement, LSU Health, the Children's Hospital, the charities we just mentioned. What is it that inspires you and your family to give back with such fervent belief?
I think it's kind of simple to me. If you can, you should. We've been blessed to be in the can department. We can give back, and our town, as I've said, is full of need. And so I just it's an obligation as much to me as anything else. If you can, you should. Plain and simple.
I love the simplicity of that.
I'm not very deep.
It's no, but there's a real teaching there. There's a real teaching. So thank you for sharing that. Jon, if you're willing, I'd like to go now to our standard closing questions. What's a book that most influenced your thinking or your personal development?
I thought about that, Todd. I mean, I would say there's three books that I've read that really inspired me to some way or another. One was The Old Man and the Sea by Hemingway.
Fantastic.
The old man chased his dream, he caught his dream, and then he had his dream taken away from him. The book Endurance about Ernest Shackleton, who went to the South Pole and it took 2 years to get out. Tremendous story of survival and just human determination. And then there's a author I like a lot named Jeff Sharara. He writes a lot about the Civil War, but he writes them in a manner where you learn about the people, Grant, Longstreet, Lee, Scott, all of them. So he writes it in a manner where you get to see the people and I don't know, those people back then seemed to carry a sense of dignity and simplistic dignity that I kind of admire.
The best advice that you've received from your parents or that you give to your own kids?
Well, I have a friend who raised two boys. They were both state champion golfers. And when they were teenagers, they would let them go off and play in these tournaments. So I was talking to my friend one time and I said, well, you let two teenage boys just go drive across the state, play in a golf tournament? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, what advice did you give them? He said, I told them the same thing every time. Don't be an ass. And I think that's where, don't be arrogant and don't be an ass. Alan Greenberg wrote a book about, well, he is right. It's a collection of his memos when he was at Bear Stearns. And a guy here in the office gave me a copy of the book, and I noted that in every memo, he said, keep your overhead low and don't be arrogant.
So the Declaration of Independence, which we referred to earlier, talks about freedom for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Jon, what do you do in pursuit of happiness?
My family, obviously, that's a kind of almost a freebie there. I love my family. I love to be out in nature. I like to hunt birds. I don't necessarily like to kill them. I do like to eat them, but I like to hunt birds, love to fish, love to see all the interaction that you see above in the sky and then below the water. We have a home in Wyoming that's close to Yellowstone and Grand Teton, and, just the beauty of that and the reality that the earth is a living thing, inspires me. Like to play golf and keep moving.
Well, you really participate in life, Jon. So thank you for taking the time to share your stories with us here on the Declarations podcast. Thank you for your friendship. And I'm thrilled and honored to have you here today.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do so, and thank you for the opportunities to be your partner. Thank you.
This podcast is provided for discussion and informational purposes only, for use by Declaration Partners LP, together with its affiliates, referred to as Declaration or We. This information discussed in this podcast may change at any time without notice, and there is no duty by Declaration to update any person to whom this information is provided. This podcast does not constitute an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to purchase any investment product or any interest in the fund or any other investment vehicles or accounts managed or advised by Declaration, a Declaration investment product, in any jurisdiction to any person. Any such offer or solicitation for interest in any Declaration investment product will only be made pursuant to such Declaration investment products' definitive offering documents, which contain a description of the material terms, including risk factors, conflicts of interest, fees and charges, and regulatory and tax considerations relating to such Declaration investment product, and which should be reviewed carefully by potential investors prior to making an investment decision. This podcast does not constitute tax or legal advice. The listener is urged to consult a professional tax and/or legal advisors regarding the possible tax, legal, economic, regulatory, or other risks and consequences associated with any investment and must be able to bear the risks involved. This podcast may contain certain forward-looking statements, which constitute Declaration's views with respect to future events, which can be identified by the use of forward-looking terminology such as intend, seek, expect, target, project, or endeavor. These statements are made based upon such views as they exist as of the date herein. There's no assurance that these such views are correct or will prove with the passage of time to be correct. Actual events or results may differ materially from those contemplated by such forward-looking statements as a result of factors beyond Declaration's control, including, without limitation, any disruptions in global, regional, or local financial, credit, or real estate markets, acts of God, fire, hurricanes, tropical storms, floods, earthquakes, or other natural disasters, outbreaks of an infectious disease, pandemic, or any other serious public health concern, war, terrorism, labor strikes, electricity shortages, or other national or local emergencies, or any combination of the foregoing. David M. Rubenstein is an anchor investor in Declaration Partners Real Estate Fund II and is not an employee of Declaration. Neither the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission nor the Securities Regulatory Authority of any state or other jurisdiction has passed upon the accuracy or adequacy of this podcast. No compensation has been awarded to any speaker for statements made that are either testimonials or endorsements. However, certain speakers may be current or former investors in certain Declaration investment products and may receive reduced fees, priority terms, priority access, co-investment rates, among other preferential treatment, which may pose a conflict of interest. All statements made on the podcast are the opinions and beliefs of the speaker and may not necessarily represent the opinions, beliefs, and position of Declaration. Consequently, from the foregoing, no reliance whatsoever should be placed on this podcast, and no decision, including any investment decision, should be made based on this podcast or on the information contained herein. Podcast prepared as of September 5th, 2024.